the Treasurer General of the ANC, Comrade Gwen Ramaphosa, all members of the National Executive Committee of the ANC who are present here, the chairperson of the ANC in Gauteng, Comrade Panyaza, Panya, Nasi Spani, Lisufi, and the Secretary of the Province, Comrade TK Ngeza. Let me begin by thanking all of you, members of the media, who are here with us to come and engage in a talk and engagement with the ANC in what is really something new that we are doing, to report back about what we have done in the past 5 years. This is a preview for what the President will deliver on behalf of the National Executive Committee tomorrow. So today we are engaging with you, with our President, leading that dialogue in terms of engagement. So we are not launching a manifesto process. We are starting a process of report back and so on about what we have done and what we continue to do as the ANC for the country. And that is what we are going to do through the President of the African National Congress. I want to thank all of you who have responded to this invitation by the ANC this morning. So I don't want to waste any time. I just want to say to all of you, you are all welcomed and feel free to engage. Mzwandi Lembeja, I can see you are really, really ready for this occasion. So our President is here. He will listen and engage with you, and he will make a presentation in terms of the preview, and from there you will engage like the program director have said, the moderator. So, but thank you very much. I also want to welcome our first DSG, Comrade Nomvula Mukonyani. As you can see, we are all here. Comrade, the second DSG is not here because of personal engagements, but Disipelele. So after the President, media people, just confine yourself to what we are here for. You will accuse me like Guamanda. Yeah. But after the President, after we close, we've got the ministers here. I know you like Sputa. He's here. And Mutswaledi. And Umam Kosazana is here. And the defense is here. Ayman Asishot is Pelel and the chief whip. So you are free to engage with us and the officials to probe further some of the issues you would have engaged the President about. But thank you, President, and the officials and everyone else. Enkosi Ndiabule, thank you. You are welcome.
Thank you very much, SG. And as he said, this is a report back, a moment for the ANC to really engage with members of the media fraternity as well as the academic community on the progress that has been made in the last 5 years. And so with that, I would like to invite the President of the ANC to come and make some opening remarks.
So, how do you want it to be? Seated?
You are welcome to sit, please.
You want me to sit?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's fine.
We are having a conversation.
With you and me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tembele. Let me extend my greetings to the Deputy President, the National Chairperson, the SG, the first DSG of the ANC, and the National Treasurer of the African National Congress. And also members of the NEC, the leadership of our province here in Gauteng, as led by Comrade Panyaza Lesufi, and a whole lot of other people who are in leadership positions,
like they always say,
in the alliance, and the media, and people in academia and others. This is a welcome opportunity, and I'd like to thank the SG as well as Comrade Mahlengi for organizing an opportunity like this. This is being billed as a pre-setter, if you like, for tomorrow's rally that we are going to have in Soweto, where we will be presenting a review of the implementation of our 2019 manifesto. So we want to thank you for being part of this occasion. Now, since the first democratic elections in 1994, the ANC has sought to develop its manifesto through thoroughgoing consultations across society, and has never seen that process as being a mere ANC process. It has engaged all of society, and it has done so through various forums. From the first People's Forum, where South Africans from across the country and across the social spectrum were able to articulate their concerns as well as their wishes, the ANC has always sought to involve our people in putting forward views. In doing so, the ANC has drawn on the tradition of consultation and engagement that it has learned over the years throughout history, and especially in 1955, when the Congress of the People got together in Kliptown here in Gauteng to draft the iconic document, which is the Freedom Charter. That process took a number of months to arrive at. So we have learned from that. We also remember the extensive consultation that we went through as South Africans as we drafted our constitution. So this engagement today is part of that tradition. However, it is slightly different because it is new. We are traversing new ground ourselves to have a pre-review type of process where we consult and engage with a number of people such as yourselves from all walks of life to reflect on the implementation. And as our moderator said, and including the SG, to have an honest discussion, an open discussion about what we have done and what we have not been able to do. And through this, we are hoping that we will be able to contribute a number of ideas that will also help in shaping and forming the 2024 election manifesto. We also know that not everyone who's here is a member of the ANC, and we welcome that. We welcome views that do not only emanate from the African National Congress members or even supporters. We also welcome the views of those who are very critical of us, and at times bitterly critical. We welcome those views as well. But nevertheless, we do value those views, as I say. Just over 4 years have passed since the ANC received a mandate from the people of our country to undertake fundamental transformation of our country in a number of ways. Next year, the people of our country will once again have an opportunity to go to the polls to go and choose the party that they believe, or indeed individuals, now that we have that, should lead their country. So this for us is therefore an appropriate moment for all of us, including the Alliance, to have this review. Now, in undertaking this review process, the ANC wants to understand why we made progress and why in certain instances we were not successful in making progress. And we need to reflect on whether the actions contained in our 2019 manifesto were appropriate to the objective that we wanted to achieve. If they are, then what else must we do to hasten the process of implementation? In 2019, we adopted a manifesto which was underpinned by the slogan, "Let's grow South Africa together." And through that, we were trying and seeking to get South Africans to work together so that we can grow the country together. And it was based on 7 priorities. The first being transforming the economy so that the economy can serve all in our country. The second was advancing social transformation. And the third was stepping up the fight against corruption. And the fourth was building safer communities. And the fifth, building and renewing a capable and developmental state. And the sixth was advancing nation building and social cohesion. And the seventh, building a better Africa and a better world. Now, this manifesto review is a learning exercise for us. It is one of the ways in which we are improving effectiveness in the ANC or of the ANC as an agent of fundamental social change. At the center of the 2019 manifesto was a commitment to work to transform our economy. This was reaffirmed at our 2022 National Conference. Specifically, we undertook to focus on interventions that would promote a developmental growth path to create more jobs and to have more decent jobs. As we undertake this manifesto review, we want to give some attention to the issues of employment. Not only do we need to track the employment figures over the last 4 years, but we also need to understand our own labor market, the focus that shapes it, and focus rather on the forces that shape it, the way it has changed, where the impediments to faster job creation lie, and where opportunities may well be found, particularly as we look at new sectors of our economy. So in this discussion, we need to acknowledge the massive damage that was caused to our economy and our society by some of the devastating processes that we've been through, COVID-19 being one of them, and the 2021 unrest being another, the climate change process that manifested itself through floods being another, and how we responded as a government to try to address the challenges that our people were facing. Now, just as the pandemic and other interventions weakened our economy, it also put severe pressure on public finances, and that made it difficult for us to address everything we needed to. And it is significant and welcome that the economy is now larger in GDP terms than it was before the onset of the pandemic. We are having to make up lost time in the creation of jobs. As many of you would know, we lost up to 2 million jobs just in a period of 1.5 years. So whilst COVID was damaging, we need to ask ourselves a number of other questions, whether we were able to make progress across those areas or not. If you look at our manifesto of 2019, we set out almost 221 commitments, which we delineated around the economy, social transformation, as I said, safer communities, corruption, the fight against corruption, capable state, and a united and diverse South Africa and a better Africa. We have been able to make progress in a number of these, and some have been achieved and some are still in progress. For instance, out of the issue of transformation of our economy, we set out 102 commitments, and we've been through them all and identified each one of them, and have been able to see and track what progress we have made. We have been able to complete 10 of those, and 86 are in progress. Some nearing full completion, and some on the way, meaning that we've had a situation where work has been done and is being done, notwithstanding the diversions that we experienced along the way, COVID, the unrest, the floods, and many other bad situations that we had to face. On social transformation, we set out 51 commitments, and 12 clear of those were achieved, and 36 are in progress. So you could say it's mixed, but progress is being made, and only one represents no progress whatsoever. And so it goes with building a capable state, and so it goes with fighting corruption, and so it goes with seeking to have a united and diverse South Africa. We have therefore made progress, and we've also looked at our performance against a 30-year backdrop. What we inherited in 1994 and where we are today. And many will admit that South Africa today is a vastly different country from what we inherited in 1994. And during the course of the conversation, I'm sure we can go through a number of areas where progress has been made or where it has not been made. But what should be clear, and people often say that do not blame the past, what should be clear is that in 1994, that shadow of apartheid has continued to cast its shade or its shadow on everything that we have sought to do. The damage that apartheid wrought on our people's lives is huge. And what this democratic government has sought to do in this whole period is to undo the damage that apartheid did. And if you look at the various elements, and we can dissect them all, we can see what has been done. For instance, to give a good example, 1994, only 36% of our people had access to electricity. Today, it is 90%, or closer to 93%. I was talking to the premiers yesterday, and some of them were saying there are still areas in our provinces where electricity has not fully penetrated, and that's precisely the task that we have. So there's been great achievement. There is still a lot of work to do, which makes us remember what Nelson Mandela wrote in his book. I have climbed many hills and I've reached the summit of a big hill. But as I look at the vista, there are still many more hills that I have to climb. And this is exactly where we are. I'm happy that we should start looking at a number of aspects: education, health, social development, crime, and building a capable state. In the conversation, I think we should invite you to look at whether those 7 priorities that we set out were achieved or not. And this is just by way of introduction, and I'm very happy to be here to engage as openly and as honestly with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for laying the ground for the discussion that we're going to be having today. I'm going to take my moderator's prerogative and ask a question of my own before opening it up to the floor. The review document acknowledges, and I quote here directly, "We present this 2019 manifesto review discussion document mindful that things are very difficult for many families and households, and we must redouble efforts to address the concerns of unemployment, corruption, electricity, crime, gender-based violence, and basic services," and close quote. When you look at the last 4 years, could you give us an assessment of where you think, and from the review that's been done, you spoke to us about the manifesto, what was in the manifesto that is complete and that's in progress, and indeed 46% of the manifesto commitments had to do with the economy. Can you tell us what you are proud of having achieved over the last 4 years, and what, in your view, you think requires greater focus in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm pleased with the manner in which we navigated our way through the disasters that befell our country over the past 4 years. As we got into government, little did we know that we would have COVID. That would lead to us shutting the entire country. That will lead to the death of 100,000 South Africans and many more who got ill. That would lead to a loss of 2 million jobs. And that would lead to exacerbating poverty. The response that we had to that calamity was historic, unprecedented, never before seen in our country, where we were able to embark on interventions that in money terms amounted to about 11% of our GDP, laying out assistance and support to those who were affected, and all of us were affected by COVID, where we were able to support working people and laid out 70 billion rand, and where we were able to support ailing businesses, and where we took an unprecedented step of also supporting the unemployed and the poor. When it came to our grants, we immediately added a little bit of money to the grants that we were paying for a while, because we knew that families were under stress. But we also introduced a new grant which is the SRD grant, which is called the 350 Rand grant. And wherever I go in the country, people keep talking about that. But that grant lays the basis, lays the foundation for a future basic income grant. For that immediately exploded us on a new policy trajectory. We have extended it over time, And now we have to countenance the issue of introducing a basic income grant, obviously within what we can afford. What we also did was to introduce other supportive measures. We supported the employment or experience gathering, if you like, of young people. We brought 800,000 young people into our schools. And they have played an enormous role. And this was the biggest public employment process at one go that our country has ever seen. And we then went on to get into other programs like agriculture, environment and all that. And we supported close on to 300,000 farmers, small-scale farmers, with assistance measures like vouchers for seeds and also fertilizers. So this whole period, as we were going through enormous distress that befell the whole world, we were able to come up with measures. And this amount I'm talking about, almost 11% of GDP, does not include what we had to lay out to get PPEs, though there were many challenges where people who with corrupt intent did funny, really sad things. But where we laid out the biggest vaccine program ever seen in the history of South Africa, where we were able to get so many of our people vaccinated. Now, the other place of pride for me was how, within a short space of time, like 6 weeks, we were able to establish an IT-based system that was able to pay 10 million people, even if it was just the 350. Unprecedented, never done on our continent, certainly. So much as the pandemic was a real testing moment, I am rather pleased with the way that we navigated our way around that.
And what aren't you so proud of?
What I'm not proud of is the way we did not anticipate that there would be corruption as we rolled out the personal protective equipment. That depressed me immensely. And I paused for a while and said, should we not have centralized the distribution of PPEs like we did with vaccines? With vaccines, many companies kept coming. We can get vaccines, and we refused. We said, no, only the state is going to do it. And that is why we were able to set up a vaccine rollout process where we work together with labor, with business and communities. And we had the religious sector also involved. And that one was well managed. And I would say that it is when we work together, when we manage processes together with various components of our community, that we are able to do better. What I'm also not pleased with is the unrest that we had in 2021, because that followed soon after we were dealing with COVID. That was devastating. We didn't manage it well. Our security forces were not prepared for it. And so that to me was a dark blot. And then the floods. When we had floods, we tried the best we could. Not as prepared as we should have been, but we are getting better. And our emergency services are getting a lot better. And I saw them in the fire in Johannesburg. They responded within 10 minutes of the fire that broke out, meaning that we are gaining quite a lot of capability, and we are spreading that message around.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. President. I suppose, and I imagine I'm going to open up now to our media colleagues, is that the issues of corruption had been a big issue already before COVID-19, so it seems unsurprising that it would have been a big issue in terms of the procurement process for COVID-19.
Yes, corruption has been a big issue. The decision we took to establish the State Capture Commission was a correct one, and it was supported all around by everyone. The commission cost a lot of money, and it's come up with a report, and we as government have responded to the recommendations that we are implementing. Many people in our country often say and allege that we are not really implementing those recommendations. All sectors that were identified by the Commission, including Parliament, is busy with that, various departments of the government, even the governing party, the ANC, committed itself to implementing a number of the Commission's reports, where, for instance, its leaders were fingered. There's a process that is underway to deal with that. So a number of iterations are underway to implement that, including recovering money that was stolen and strengthening entities that were completely destroyed. SARS is one of those, the NPA is one of those, and the Hawks is one of those, and many other institutions. And of course, our state-owned enterprises are also under repair, and we are working on those from Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, and all the others. So they too became enmeshed in the state capture process, and what we've been doing is to unravel and undo those things that were done badly in those institutions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to open up to our colleagues from the media. There are 3 mic points, one to my right, one in the center, and one to the left. Anyone who would like to ask, I see Ferial, I can see you over there, I can see you, Karine, on my left. If you would please walk up to the mic on the left-hand side, close to you. And then I can see you, Butnzai, and then question at the back. Okay, so we'll take these 4. And please introduce yourself and the media house you're from.
Can I go?
Yes, you can.
Good morning, Mr. President and Stimbile. Thank you very much for having us here. It seems clear from many polls that the ANC might not achieve a simple majority come 2024. I was wondering, sir, who you felt your natural coalition partner might be, and how do we achieve, you're smiling, and how do we achieve a center of politics in South Africa, not a centrist, but a center that holds our country together? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ferial, and the succinctness of that question. Karine, shall we take the 2 and then we will allow you an opportunity, Mr. President. Karine?
Is this mic? Okay.
Yes.
Hi, thank you, Stimbile. It's Karine du Plessis from Reuters. Mr. President, I have a question to you with regards to, it's quite a recent question about the events of the week. What are the ANC's policies with regards to housing and the management of immigration going forward in order to, because those were 2 issues that came up this week, to avoid tragedies like we've seen this week. And also, I think Ferial also asked about the coalitions. How does the President think we can manage coalitions better so that we can actually have cities that work? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Karine. So there's 2 questions there. The one set around what may happen after the elections next year, so not directly to the manifesto from 2019, but certainly an evolution of the country's politics that we've seen since then, and so the issue around coalitions. But then I think this very important set of questions around the challenges of housing and immigration that we have. There were a number of commitments in the manifesto around housing and expanding housing stock. Can you please speak to those?
Well, thank you very much. The ANC is going to achieve an outright majority, so be relaxed. We are not working to be in coalition, but if we have to choose a coalition partner, we will choose the ANC to be our coalition partner. We are confident that we are going to emerge victorious. People of our country, the majority of the people who have always voted for the ANC and who've supported the ANC, still see the ANC as the only vehicle that, having commenced and started the transformation process in our country, can continue with it and consolidate it and make it better. Many of our people don't see any other vehicle that can do so. The ANC is a party that has wall-to-wall coverage of the country and existence through our 4,500 or so branches, is in every area of our country, ward, street, pathway, in the villages and in the cities. So we are confident that we will win an outright majority. And we are going to be aided and abetted in all this by our alliance partners, the workers of our country under the banner of COSATU will support us and will also be in the campaign process, and also the South African Communist Party, SANCO, and a number of other organizations are going to be on the ground, in the field, and reporting to our people as we are doing tomorrow. And by the way, tomorrow's review process is going to be rolled out throughout the country. And this is a unique process by any party in our country, which is going to culminate in us drafting our manifesto. How can we better manage coalitions? The Deputy President Paul Mashitile held a forum in Cape Town where he invited a number of parties to discuss the issue of manifestos. And one of the key issues that emerged there is that we need to have a threshold. A threshold, and that was discussed, and the declaration that was eventually published also will be adding to the understanding that we should have as South Africans on how to manage coalitions. And if you like, I mean, from day one of our democracy, the ANC always had one or other party as a party that we govern with on an invitation basis. And that tradition has continued. I don't necessarily think you can call that a coalition, but we've been well practiced in working with other parties and on an invitation basis. This time around, we're confident we're going to have an outright majority, and what happens after the elections is what we will determine then. Karine, on the question of housing, what happened in Johannesburg was quite devastating and very, very sad. Now, it's a multi-layered problem that Johannesburg is having to deal with. Spent quite a bit of time with the mayoral committee members, our regional chairperson, Dada Murero, the premier, Panyaza Lesufi, discussing all these matters that give rise to challenges not only to Johannesburg, but to the big cities, particularly the metros. Cape Town is having the same problem, Johannesburg, eThekwini, and a number of others, where there's a lot of influx, not only from foreigners, but also from people in our own country who throng to the major cities because they are the hubs of economic activity and seek to get accommodation. Now, with the budgetary constraints that we have in terms of rolling out housing, we've had limitations and have not been able to address the increased influx of people in Gauteng, for instance. Gauteng has grown up to 15 million people, and with many of them not having adequate housing and living in informal settlements. And that has now led to people taking over buildings in our cities. But the saddest part is where buildings are hijacked and taken over illegally, and those criminals who hijack the buildings then start levying exorbitant rentals to vulnerable and poor people. Now, the local government has to enforce the laws. I am told that with regard to that building, which is a city-owned building, which used to be an old government building, that's where 55 years ago or so I went to take my passbook. It's Albert Street. I still remembered it when I saw it. But the building is so old and parts of it is not safe. And the local government sought to take people out, but it was stopped by either a court process or by NGOs. So there are laws that now need to be enforced. And we therefore need to deal with how those people who should not be living there are accommodated. Now, of course, a number of them do not even have permits to be in Johannesburg or in South Africa. So that's an added challenge that we have to deal with. But nonetheless, this has given us a wake-up call, and I have said that our cities and municipalities must now pay attention to how people live. We do encourage people to live in the inner city so that we densify the cities, but we need to do it in accordance with our laws.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. President. I suppose the issue around the court cases has been, government being taken to court for not implementing the laws that are in place as they are written. Do you think that there is would be any move to trying to change some of those laws if you feel that there are impediments?
The issue of the restrictions for development that are placed on us as government, and it's right across even, the country, are at times detrimental to development and progress. And in some cases, we have swung the pendulum too much in the way of red tape and restrictions that impede us from doing good by our people. So we need to look at some of those laws, and I've directed ministers and various people in government to get us to start looking at the unnecessary laws that would not, if they are changed, violate people's rights. So people's rights, as set out in the Constitution, needs to remain sacrosanct, but those protocols, those rules, those regulations, and those laws that we ourselves have put in place that make it impossible for us to move quickly and in time need to be reviewed, because by and large they impede us. I give you one good example, and we've been dealing with this, for instance, in relation to Eskom. We've set up PFMA rules that require that a corporate entity like Eskom should get Treasury permission each time it orders a boiler, each time it orders some part. And that then restricts it or impedes it from doing what it should do as a business over a long period. So those are some of the things that we should not violate any law, but that should smoothen the way in which we do things.
All right, thank you. Butumzwa.
Good morning. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. President, and obviously the other leaders and colleagues, academia, and everyone. Mr. President, you have basically said there's a lot that you have achieved, and I think that's quite correct. But obviously, there are those that you haven't. Here is the difficulty, perhaps from the general populace. It would appear, so when we engage with a number of people, that as much as there are so many good things that the ANC is doing, but perhaps it is not able to strike a balancing act or multitasking, as they say. If you look on the ground versus what you are saying, you came in this government almost 5 years ago, and then load shedding was a bit lower than it is now. So on the ground, evidence means differently to what you are saying. We know you're working on it, but the evidence right now is that load shedding is worse than when you came in. Number 2. People are struggling, Mr. President, financially. It's been tough. So what people used to do generally, from the townships, from everywhere, when they are going to work, they would buy, let's say, a ticket for the train. Someone will be able to budget properly and buy a ticket for the train for the whole month. Today, trains, I know that we are busy trying to get them back, but they are not there. So people have to spend a lot more. So, yes, you are trying to do things, but the evidence on the ground suggests otherwise. So it means some of what you are doing is putting even difficulty on the people. Let me finish.
Yeah, because it's an essay, a thesis, PhD.
Yeah, you said it's an engagement, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Sure. All right, so moving towards conclusion, Mr. President. I think the other thing is just look, I mean, if you're traveling, whether you're traveling to a township, the roads and all those things. You know, let me make a quick example. I traveled to KZN some 6-7 weeks ago, and then I think just before Newcastle, I tend to take the road towards Vryheid. So as you turn, I passed about 4 cars which had tire punctures because of the potholes. Yes, the trains, or rather the goods, have been moved from the rail and they are on the road, and the road is suffering. Yes, you are trying to do something, but evidence on the ground is putting even more difficulty to the people that you are trying to serve. What is it that you are going to do to really do things that people will see that they are making the difference in their lives versus what is happening now? Yes, what you are speaking about, we accept that. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. President, your people are suffering. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more and introduce yourself and Media House, and then we will. Yeah.
The Maserebo President. My name is Moloko Mloto from ENCA. I have 3 quick questions. I heard you saying that one of the things that you were disappointed.
Thank you very much.
You did not anticipate there would be corruption with regard to the procurement of PPEs. South Africans would recall you were on TV vowing, making a commitment in January 2021 that there would not be corruption. I'm not very much interested in the contradiction that you are making now. I'm more interested in the fact that even after you had made a commitment, that there would not be corruption. Yet there was corruption. Do you not think, therefore, that people who committed corruption knew that they can get away with this impunity because the system would not catch them? That on its own, if you were just to speak to the ineffectiveness of the system. When you were elected as president of the ANC for the first time, it was on the ticket of renewal. You might have heard the former president of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, 2 weeks back when he was interacting with the students and stakeholders at the University of South Africa. And he said that the ANC has completely failed to renew itself. Your view there from someone who was in the position you are holding. Lastly, in the wake of this inferno that unfortunately killed 76 people in Johannesburg, you might have heard that the NGOs have really been severely criticized for, going to court to ensure that the Bill of Rights, which is the cornerstone of our democracy, is implemented. We know it protects everyone who is within South Africa, including foreign nationals. In the view of the criticism by some of the leaders, both at the local level and even national leaders to some extent, do you support their views that the NGOs are problematic when they challenge the actions that are taken by the administrators to either evict people from such buildings? Because these people came here not because the courts allowed them in, but because those who are supposed to implement or enforce compliance failed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those. I've acknowledged that I can see the gentleman in the middle who'd like to ask a question. I'm going to allow a moment for the President to respond to that. And I think two very important issues from there. The people are poorer than they were in 2019. So despite it's 18.6 million people are on social grants as of 2023, but overall people feel as though their lives are, and people's lives are harder. And then this issue of impunity for corruption. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Zwai. Yes, you do in your background to your question say that, yes, we can see that things are being done. To me, that is acknowledgement that even you can see that things are being done and work is underway to turn the situation around. And one of the things, of course, that we need to acknowledge is that we got into this situation because many things had gone wrong. And I did say that our state-owned enterprises were so negatively affected to a point where even the trains could no longer move. You've often heard when the SG was Minister of Transport, he now wears a different hat and sometimes he speaks out. But even when he was Minister of Transport, he would come to me and say, President, I cannot believe the situation that we have, that we've got ghost workers and thousands of them. And that was aided and abetted by the state capture. And it took time to arrive at this type of information. And he then got involved in trying to get the trains to move again. Passenger rail trains, goods trains and all that. So what we went through was we went right down to the bottom. And having gotten there, there's only one way out, it's up. And that's exactly where we are. The situation was truly bad and horrible. And what we've been seeking to do over the past 4 years, 5 if you like, is to do the rebuilding process. We are rebuilding. And all hands are now on deck to rebuild the state, to rebuild the capability of various institutions. You talk about load shedding. Load shedding was long in the making. And it started literally 1998 when ESCOM said we need to build new power stations. And at the time, wrong decisions were taken. That no, don't build. And that has been admitted. And it was like, a choo-choo train that was going to crash. And it had to get to a point where it is today. Trying to shore it up was not going to be an easy task. We now have a better understanding, a deeper understanding even, of what the real challenge is. And we've been communicating that to our people. Our people, even as we go through load shedding, they have a better understanding. And even those in our townships, see, we have an added different problem in our townships. Even in the township where I grew up, they are affected doubly by load shedding as well as by the short-circuiting of the electricity with the transformers breaking down. A matter that the Premier and the city are attending to. So all those processes people now understand, and they see the steps and the efforts that we are taking to address that. And those are being addressed in earnest. Load shedding, we did say, would be reduced from 6, and by next year, as the Minister of Electricity, who I appointed against, the wishes of many people, has been doing a great job. And working together with the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Public Enterprises, the three of them have been working well together to make sure that we address this, and from different points of view. Now, load shedding is going to be reduced and gotten rid of. With the initiatives that we are taking to restructure ESCOM, to deal with the debt, to deal with the issues of transmission, all that is being addressed, and all that has been long in the making. What we are doing is to repair, to rebuild. Precisely the point that you are acknowledging, that you see that it's happening. Minister of Transport was telling me the other day that, President, you won't imagine the joy that I saw on people's faces as we opened a line corridor, passenger rail. People came forward to her and said, we used to spend 1,900 on transport. Now this person came and said, I now spend 300 rand. And of course it should never have gotten to a stage where they spend 1,900. But they are now spending 300 rand because the train is now moving. And we are opening more and more corridors. We've gotten rid of the ghost workers who were in PRASA. And we are repairing all that. Yes, people are struggling. We know that. And these are the impacts of low and poor economic growth, which has engulfed the whole world. And we are also in the midst of it. Our economy is not growing at levels that we want it to grow. But in our case, it's exacerbated by some of, if you could say man-made, self-made rather, impediments such as our logistics. Our goods trains have not been moving. Our ports have been reduced to a shadow of their former selves, but we are addressing it. And how are we addressing it? You would know that because we've communicated that. We are addressing it in cooperation with all sectors, with the unions, with the business communities, particularly on the logistics. We are working with the agriculture sector, the timber sector, the auto sector, the fresh food sector, the citrus food sector, and all of them, we're all hands on deck repairing that whole logistics sector so that the trains can move again, so that the trucks can get off our roads. We are repairing our roads. I traveled by road to town in one of our countries, and it was just filled with potholes all over. And that was like 3 months ago. And I traveled to that town again 6 weeks ago. The potholes, well, they were repairing the potholes. And I saw all these people in orange uniforms, overalls rather, repairing the potholes. And 6 weeks ago I traveled, the potholes were gone, bar one. So it basically told me that work is now underway. Even the potholes are being repaired in cooperation, yes, with the private sector. When it comes to poverty, yes, poverty is rife in our country. Some months ago I said we had reduced poverty from 17% to 7%. People doubted that, and Africa Fact Check was asked to check whether that is true or not. And they found that it is true. Poverty, like the multidisciplinary poverty or multidimensional poverty, has been reduced to 7%. That does not mean that there is no acute poverty in our country when measured against the three other measures. But the fact of the matter it has, and I was talking to one person who works in an NGO, they said, President, the initiatives, the pro-poor initiatives that the government has taken have lessened the incidence of poverty. Had we not taken some of those initiatives, poverty would have been much worse. So even that, the government has been taking steps to reduce the effect of poverty. Of course, we are not doing enough. And we are also held back by our own fiscus weakness. Fiscus is weak because we're not getting enough revenue from all the key drivers of getting revenue.
Then can we move to the...
No, but I want to deal with this one of the ANC failing to renew itself. Now, you know, we decided at our two conferences that the ANC is going to renew itself. Renewal is not a one-day event. It was never going to happen on one day. The ANC, we've all admitted, has been having problems with the process of renewal in decline over a number of years. And this has been articulated by many leaders. And I've been saying, rather than being critical, I want leaders who are going to say, this is how we renew the ANC. Not just stand on podiums and say, you are much worse than this time and that time. I want proposals. So if we say the ANC is in a mess, I immediately say, tell me, as a leader, what should we do to help renew this ANC? And that's precisely the steps that we have been taking. We've been dealing with issues that debilitate against the adherence to our values in very practical terms. And many parties around the world have had problems with weakening of their own values and principles. And we are in the upward trajectory now. We are dealing with issues that militate against the standing of the ANC. And we've been very open and very forward. The leadership of the ANC, the National Executive Committee, right now is committed to ensuring that there is renewal. And we're taking it right down to the branches. So I want to say leaders of the ANC must themselves be championing the renewal of the ANC and taking steps to ensure that the ANC is renewed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to park it because I do want colleagues...
I do want to add
Yes.
that we don't see NGOs as a problem.
Okay.
Because the question was raised. Are NGOs a problem? No. NGOs play a very critical role in the body politic of this country. And we want to work with NGOs. We want to cooperate with them even on issues of housing, even on all other issues. We work with NGO, for instance, in how we can structure a future basic income grant. We are working with them, hands-on. So they play a critical role, and where there are weaknesses, we've got to address those.
Thank you. There's a question over here, and then I'm opening up to all the academics and think tank people. I can see Mr. Boyd, nice to see you, Doctor. I can see your hand, and Sther, I can see your hand. I can see a hand over there. So we're going to start, and then, great.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon to everyone in the House. My name is Mpumzi Zuzile. I'm from City Press newspaper. My question to the President is that it's been a year since the Zondo Commission report has been handed over to Parliament. Parliament has missed its own deadlines. I hear the President said they're working hard to ensure that the recommendations of that commission are implemented. Even the chairperson of that commission, the Chief Justice, mentioned that an anti-corruption state capture commission needs to be appointed by Parliament. That hasn't happened. My question, coming to that, how is the ANC going to ensure that it gets the confidence of the people when it is not showing that it is fighting or implementing the Zondo Commission recommendation? For instance, there's about 97, if I'm not mistaken, leaders of the ANC, including in the top 7, that are mentioned in the commission. What is the ANC doing about that? Secondly, the Auditor General is about to release its audit findings. For the past 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, from local government to provincial government, the Auditor General raised an issue of heavy reliance on consultants. But you'll find that still a majority of the departments or the municipalities get poor audit findings, even though they have used consultants. What is government and the ANC going to do to ensure the heavily reliance on consultants? Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thanks for raising that issue around the consultants, the issue of building a capable state. So many of our issues as a country come from an administration that isn't quite functional, and there was a lot in the manifesto around that. Sther, I can see you, and then I'm going to go. Oh, Dr. Boy, you're standing. There we go.
Good afternoon to the President, to the moderator. My name is TK Paul from the Wits School of Governance. I just have moderated 2 questions, and the second one is also a bit of maybe to help the ANC, because as academics we're always accused of saying we criticize but never give solutions. Indeed. Yeah, so the first question, President, is what explains the poor quality of articulation of the 2019 manifesto vis-a-vis the 2004, 2009, and 2014 manifestos? If you read the 2004, page 6, and 2009, page 1, and 2014 manifesto 6 to 14, the explanation of the economy and the crisis of the South African state is actually quite clear. For instance, on page, I think, 6 of the 2004, they speak about the debt crisis and how South Africa was able to actually move out of that, and that allows for more policy room. The 2019 manifesto takes what the ANC has done in 3 decades, because we have to kind of count it as 3, we're rounding off, and says that we need to judge you on a 5-year period. That seems a bit, I don't want to say disingenuous, but I think a bit shallow. Yeah, it's a bit shallow. Because we should be judging you on a period of, from those manifestos to what you're going into the election now, to say, what have you done in those long time periods? I know we gauge you according to ANC presence and leadership, but you are one party at the end of the day, last time I checked. And the 2019 manifesto is really a poor articulation of the history of the manifestos post 1994. So maybe I'd like a direct answer to that one. And then secondly, on the ANC manifesto, the one before we got today, still 2019, page 57, and the review one from today, page 34, you speak about a capable developmental state, and I hear Dr. Stebele said that. Is that a clear admission that from 2009, where you said it's a democratic developmental state, that the ANC admits that they failed in trying to be a proper developmental state? Because to be a proper developmental state, you don't need to put prefixes before what it really means. It's either you are or you're not. And could this be because the ANC, I think, on the big ideas, you're no longer a big idea party? And now to come to my recommendation so that I don't seem like I'm being harsh is, if you are still let's say if and when you return to power, maybe the two big ideas I would say you need to revisit, because these are not my ideas or my recommendations. This is purely from the ANC. I think it was from the Stellenbosch conference. The idea of provinces. We have seen provinces don't work. For local government to work, we actually need to get rid of that structure of provinces. This is something the ANC was very theoretically strong in and actually having a debate about in the early 90s and in many of their documents. What happened to that? Because as we currently see, if you even look at the the midterm, if you do the projections for the next 5 years of the budget, provinces are actually going to cost us more. And a lot of that money, as you correctly put in your district development model, should be going towards how do we grow our economy from Joburg and Durban to Cape Town? Because the rest of South Africa is excluded if you don't live in those areas. And secondly, the issue of super ministries. Again, not my idea. This goes back to the ANC in the 90s and your policy documents, that we have too many ministries. You said so yourself. And the research we're doing at the Wits School of Governance under myself, funding pending from the government, we're actually looking to say, look, in truth, the South African government only needs about 18 ministries.
How many?
18.
Oh,
18.
18, not 80. Because if it was 80, I'll also apply to be a minister. But it's 18, actually it's actually 16 to 17, and constitutionally, if you look at other countries, it's actually lower. But the question, my suggestion and humble recommendation would be, go back to the idea of having super ministries. This is an ANC idea, not mine. Because when we do our research looking at that, when you deal with the economy and you actually put them in one box, this super ministry, you actually are able to actually address the macro and the micro issues. So those are just criticisms and recommendations, because at the Wits School of Government, we're all about moving South Africa forward.
Very much. And please share those papers.
My name is Tembile Cele. I'm with Bloomberg News. You mentioned the issue of the fiscus, President. National Treasury is already warning that the medium-term budget is going to be a tough one, especially for those who like to spend. We have a massive budget deficit. You mentioned the revenue shortfall, and those things put debt stabilization targets at risk. So I wonder, what is your outlook on public finances?
I can't hear. I can't follow.
Speak slowly.
Slow down.
Yes, please.
On the fiscus, President, you mentioned that earlier in your comments. National Treasury is worried, and they have warned government departments that they need to rein in their spending. The medium-term budget is going to be a tough one. We have a massive budget deficit, the revenue shortfall that you spoke of, and those two things are obviously putting debt stabilization targets at risk. So I'm just wondering, what is your outlook on public finances? Are you at all concerned? And then secondly, Treasury has also been clear that government cannot spend its way out of the problems that it has. Already the spending that we have in a constrained environment is not expanding the tax base, it's not bringing about growth. So what is the plan for growth, Mr. President? We're good?
All right. Yes.
Thank you.
So that was an issue about your view on the fiscus, that there's been a warning from the Treasury that that we should all be expecting quite a lot of cuts in the MTBPS, and that we're going to be working in a very constrained fiscal environment. What is your outlook on the national finances? And I suppose then a question there also around different government departments being told to cut their spending. And in a situation where many of the commitments in this manifesto and government policies require a great deal of investment, how do we balance those two? I'm going to take this last comment and then we'll go back to the President.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and everyone this side of the table.
Sorry, can't hear you, sir. Can you?
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. President, and everyone this side of the room. My name is Mawande. I work at the Sunday World. Perhaps before I get to my questions, President, let me make a heartfelt congratulations to you for hosting a very successful BRICS Summit recently. We know you navigated very tough waters going into that BRICS Summit, but you did very, very well by eventually hosting it successfully. Now, moving to the questions. You speak of social transformation, President. You say you made 51 commitments, you achieved 12. There's progress in 36, and there's one where there was no progress at all. What do you mean by progress in any event, Mr. President? Because to me, this does seem like a very dismal performance. And I say this on the backdrop of all the social issues that our country faces. If on 51 commitments you can only achieve in 5 years only 12, for me, that is an extremely dismal failure, unless, of course, we're using the gauge of Rama Engie at 30%. And then on the issue of 30 years of democracy, Mr. President, you also go on to blame apartheid for some of the challenges that our country is still facing. Mr. President, in your opinion, is it still fair to blame apartheid? I know I'm not naive enough not to understand that apartheid, as well as colonialism, was a very systematic process that will take probably more than a century to resolve. But is it not opportunistic to always seem to blame apartheid, especially closer to the elections? I mean, as you say today, just yesterday, the Minister of Social Development, Merlin Zulu, also did the same. I found that to be quite opportunistic, especially if you look at countries like the United Arab Emirates. Look at Dubai. Just in 1991, it was an absolute desert. By 2016, it was a fully fledged city with skyscrapers and stuff like that. What has the ANC built in 30 years? Thank you very much.
Thank you. President, that question there around what do we mean by progress in terms of the achievement of the manifesto commitments?
Okay, so should I start with?
Yes, please.
The first one. You've taken a lot of questions. I think it was Mpunzi. I didn't take all your names because I was busy focusing on the questions. Who reflected on the slow movement in the implementation of the State Capture Commission recommendations. And it's been a year, absolutely right. And without sounding negative towards the Commission, the Commission in doing its work also needed quite a bit more time, and we kept extending the time that it needed to finish its work, because they found that they were dealing with intricate matters that needed further fine-tuning. And when it comes, say, for instance, to Parliament and other institutions, work is underway. It's not like people are sitting back and not doing anything. We have committed that, having spent more than R1 billion and having spent considerable time in going through the various evidence submissions, that we will implement the recommendations of this commission. And some of them, we did say, will take time. And you highlight that there are like 97 ANC leaders who were either named or whatever. And the ANC, as I said, is dealing with this matter itself. And in the case of some of those leaders, some of them have challenged what has been said in the commission, and those processes are underway, and we have said that that too must be allowed time to happen. And I know that people want to see scalps on the table. They want to see decapitation and all that as a result of what has been said, and that will lead to satisfaction. They want to see people in jail and all that. And I've often said that these are processes that have to be followed. And I would not really fully subscribe to the notion that, Parliament is avoiding implementing, or other institutions are avoiding. The State Capture Commission recommendations were a real plethora, or touched a plethora of areas, and we are going through that. And from a government point of view, we are committed to implementing the state capture recommendations. You cite the failure to set up a particular institution, and all that too is a matter that is being relied on, or implemented. You say that the Auditor General has opined that many local government institutions rely on consultants. That is true. And we have said that when it comes to the capacity of the state, in many, many ways, there is lack of capacity. And the lack of capacity is even more manifested at the local government level, where, for instance, you don't have well-qualified CFOs, you don't have well-qualified engineers, you don't have well-qualified town planners. Apartheid robbed us of having a plethora of town planners in the education system. So that is partly the shadow of apartheid that I talk about, that had we been a normal country, we would have had our country littered with young people who are town planners, who live in the various towns. We don't have them. So those are the effects of apartheid. That is what apartheid robbed the country and robbed the future, because they had town planners. They made it a point to train town planners and denied black people the opportunity to be trained as town planners or engineers. And come the moment when there's democracy, that shadow of failure, a deliberate failure by the apartheid state, is cast on the present and the future.
But Mr. President, there are many young graduates who are town planners, who are engineers, who've come out of the system. I speak here, I suppose I'm speaking in defense of my sector of higher education. The higher education system has trained many people since 1994.
Yes, but you see, this is where the challenge is, and it's a serious challenge. Some of those quite often don't even come from Pampiersdorp. Do you know where Pampiersdorp is? Now, Pampiersdorp needs a town planner. The education system in Pampiersdorp did not produce a town planner. So anyone, if I take you as a town planner and say, go and live in Pampiersdorp, you are going to say, no, I'm not going to go there. I would rather go as a consultant. So then we take you there as a consultant. You don't live there. So that's why the reliance on consultants. But I'm not trying to water down the point you've made. We've got a number of young people who we are proud to have trained as engineers and town planners, and some of those we have not absorbed. And that is our weakness. And that is the weakness of the state, which we must and do admit. There are many graduates in our country who are going around without jobs. And that is an indictment against us. And it's quite often a budgetary issue, a fiscal issue, because we've got Premier of KwaZulu-Natal yesterday was telling me that they've got more than 200 doctors who are not placed in our healthcare facilities, largely because of their own challenge as a province not to be able to pay them. So the challenges that we have to deal with are many. But when it comes to this, the reliance on consultant is given rise to by a multiplicity of reasons. And this is one of them. So in order to build a capable state, we are obviously saying that we need to insource a number of services rather than outsource. because the tendency has evolved where many institutions, local government and even state institutions, have outsourced the planning process, the financial management process, and a number of others. We rely on outsiders. And in the end, we fall into the hands of companies such as McKinsey, Bain, and all that, who then have a whole number of their own intents, some of them not very good. So we need to insource, and I'm a strong advocate for insourcing. The people must be brought inside, because quite often with outsourcing, getting consultants, we find that we pay much more to consultants. And this was also written by Professor Mazzucato, who we use as an advisor in our Presidential Economic Council. And she said that the UK government had also outsourced quite a number of its functions, and they found a great deal of weakness. So we are seeking then to get rid of that weakness, bring in those young people, and give them the opportunity to work for their government, and many want to do so. On the question from our colleague from the School of Government, I think he said he was not very audible to me, but I think he said, should we not be judged on a much longer period than a shorter period? And I would tend to agree with him. When you look at our performance against the backdrop of a much longer period, you actually do see that we've moved the needle. For instance, when it comes to something like reticulation of piped water, we have done much more than what we found under apartheid. When it comes to human settlements or housing, we've been able to accommodate people, many more people than what apartheid had done. So, yes, I agree. On issues like, for instance, access to health, many more people under the democratic government do have access to health. We built many more clinics than we found under the apartheid era. So if you look at it across that line, you'll find that we have achieved a lot more than we did. Now, he says, have we failed as a developmental state? I would argue that we have not failed as a developmental state. There have been weaknesses. There have been moments when we've dropped our determination to be a developmental state, where we focus more on either doing things very quickly or looking at things that have a more of a financial outcome than a developmental outcome to advance the interests of our people. But if you look right across the board, you will find that when it does come to development, we have. I mean, today we have, is it developmental and I would pose the question, is it developmental to have given our young people almost universal access to education? We've got 12 million young people today who are in our school basic education system, with 9 million of them getting meals every day. Is that developmental? I argue it is developmental. And we're developing further. We're now moving to giving them 2 meals a day, because we have realized that there's a stunting problem, because they don't eat at home in the morning, and we're now saying, let's give them 2 meals a day. Is it developmental to focus on early childhood development? We've got 7 million young children running around the streets and pathways of our country who are not in early learning institutions. We've now put 1.5 million of them in formal ECD. Is that developmental? It is developmental. Now, I see you're in a hurry. Big ideas. We are no longer an organization of big ideas. And he cites the issue that was a big idea, that solved the issue of provinces. I will concede that we have not surged forward on big ideas, on tackling the big ideas that can change the trajectory of the country. For instance, provinces. It was mooted some time ago, and we let it go. One of the other things that was mooted, which we're moving on now, was to have your regional electricity distribution processes, REDs. It was mooted, we left it, we are now coming back to it. Too many ministries, haha. Yes, I did say that we will reduce the ministries. We brought them down to about 26, we then got them up again to 30, and I still remain committed that we are going to reduce them. But my dear brother moots a very interesting question. He says, have super ministries. And that may well be a good answer to that. Now, coming to Treasury. Treasury has said that we are facing fiscal challenges, which is true. The revenue projections that we had have been lower than what we had anticipated. That immediately tells you that you are going to have headwinds. So therefore, in the end, what should we do? And the discussion is ongoing. It's not necessarily cutting spending. It's seeing how best you focus on your key delivery areas, your key investment areas, and look at how you recalibrate the other spending expenditure.
So it's about prioritizing.
Areas. Yeah, you prioritize. So that's precisely what we did. Now, she also said, somebody also said, is it fair to continue blaming apartheid? And I know that people never want to be blamed. It's not so much a question of blaming. It's reflecting on the damage that apartheid did. And when I say that the shadow of apartheid continues to cast, if you like, its shadow on our future trajectory, it is true. It's a reality. We cannot run away from it. Just like in America, they are saying the impact of slavery continues to cast a shadow on the lives of African Americans. You cannot undo that. It is a reality. And even authors like Piketty and many other authors do say that the past casts a shadow and you therefore need to work your way out, which is precisely what we are doing. Thank you.
President, we're open to our academic colleagues, and then, ma'am, please will you go stand at the... Thank you.
Yes, Tengos. I don't mean to add to your woes, Mr. President.
Prof, you're very famous, but please say who you are.
From UJ. Your party sometimes puzzles me a great deal. I hear you. You are quite eloquent, but I wonder at times whether your party functions as a fully functional party, from national down to the branches. You look at municipalities, for instance, Mr. President. Monies are returned. You speak, you sit in the office with your SG and everybody else, say all these nice things that you are saying now, and you have said them repeatedly in the past. But when you go to your down, right, buildings are left just there without anything being done. Urban decay is a major problem. So then one thinks, or rather wonders, do these ANC councillors know what they ought to do? What is the capacity of your office to tell them what to do? I mean, I even got to a point where I kind of think that, there is just separate parts of the party that are not connecting, for instance. One does its own thing. So what is the capacity of the party to make sure that what you say so eloquently goes down to the ground, that monies are spent properly? So far, I see a dysfunctional ANC. I don't think you guys are in charge of what is happening on the ground. That's what I'm seeing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stembile. I'm Frank Lekaba from the School of Governance, Faith School of Governance. Two concerns, President. This is on priority 7, Better Africa, Better World. There is a resurgence of coups in the continent. And it seems like the African Union is now becoming incapacitated to handle these coups. At some point, when we transformed in 2002, the Lome Declaration helped to reduce this scourge of coups in the continent. But it seems like they are resurging, and it seems like the AU is incapable to handle them. So, do you think we should have a rethink on that Lome Declaration of the African Union? That is one. Two, which is the last point, is the democratic elections in the continent. To say democratic elections leaves much to be desired, because when you look at the recent elections in the continent, they look like bogus or a sham. And of course, we must commend SADC Observer Mission for being firm in its report and bringing to the fore issues that will help the election management bodies in terms of how to manage democratic elections. But this is a concern as well in the continent, President. I know South Africa is not a hegemon, and one of our foreign policy tenets is multilateralism. Of course, now SADC and AU have to be very strong in that regard. But what do we do with this so undemocratic elections in the continent, President? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank the relations dimension to this discussion. Prof.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you for sharing with us what, in your view, has worked in the last 5 years. I want to, maybe let me preface what I'm going to say by saying we've got very capable people in this country. Sometimes one feels like the more capable and qualified and respected you are internationally, the more undesirable you become to the country. Now, what we've had a promise of 2 new universities in the last 5 years or 4. One focusing on science and technology in Ekurhuleni, and the other one focusing on crime and crime prevention in Hammanskraal. And those haven't materialized. And the reason why it becomes relevant to talk about this is not just because the ANC government, since it came into power, only established 2 universities since it came into power. In a country where black people's access to university was not so encouraged. And of course, I don't want to talk about numbers, because I know in terms of number of black students in universities, we've done hugely. But I mean, we are a majority, so we've got a lot of students. If you just count, and you can ask someone in your office just to check, out of the learners who pass matric and qualify to go to university, can all of this, just to qualify to go to university and to go to TVET, can the current, given all the enrollment plans and targets that all the universities have and TVETs, would we be able to accommodate them? The answer is no, even if they qualify. And so what we have is a growing danger, because we've got a growing population of young people in this country and continent. And they pass matric, they're smart, they roam around, and so you've got smart people walking around with lots and lots of energy. Of course, some of them will grab the opportunities online, learn how to code, do programs to do machine learnings online, and then do other things. But a whole lot of them get recruited into groups that can easily, Mr. President, put the country to a standstill. And so I want to say to you, we've got a ticking time bomb, and it's young people. Those of us who care about them know they're younger, not only of no jobs, but of where do I go? Because universities are full, even though I have passed my matric and I have nowhere to go. So maybe you start by opening those 2 universities that you promised, Or maybe share the review that was done and so on. The mayor, the minister, and the president, you talked about them. And maybe let's start there, and then, and then have a think tank sort of to think about what do we do with this energy that's growing in this country and continent. It can be our capital in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Prophet. I think an important point in young people. South Africa is about 60.6 million people. These are from the Stats SA population stats from last year. 60.6 million people, 42.8 million are under the age of 40. So it's a very important question about what do we do with all those young people. I'm taking these last two and then allowing the President to respond, and then we're going to take another round. Haima.
Ndimasiari. Oh, come on now. We are all South Africans here. Ndimasiari Abudi. Mo Presidente, NEC members, editors, and fellow academics. My name is Tiziambi Chivasependla. I'm a professor in education, management, leadership, and administration. I'm currently at Tshwane North TVET College. I'm a proud product of apartheid. And I'm also very appreciative of the current ANC government. Very, because we are here today because of this ANC government. We can say so many things, which some of them, of course, maybe are justified. But where we are, especially my generation, I never thought I'll be able to see a new democratic government. Having said that, we have a serious problem. And I think it's an elephant in the room, and we are not necessarily addressing it. The issue of literacy and numeracy. I passed with a 50%, and I always wanted to at least get an 80%. And I'm sure I did get some few distinctions in the process. But right now, our kids are discouraged, are put at that level where they feel good when they get 33%. If we address that, we'll be able to address so many trials and failures. Failures in terms of skills. According to research, only 35% of our learners are able to read and write. 12% in Mpumalanga, and with at least 43% in the Cape, Western Cape. We need to go back to the drawing board and look at what is happening, especially with the decreasing of the pass rate for our kids. We are not necessarily helping them, but we are destroying them. They cannot compete, they cannot even begin to build this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Prophet. Thanks for reminding us that universal access is one thing, but what's the quality of the education that's being accessed? Isabel, I can see you, Prof, and you're standing. Can I take you in the next round? We've been given permission to go for an additional 20 minutes, so I'm going to definitely take you in the next one. Thanks, Prophet. Isabel.
I'm Isabel Fry, Executive Director of Social Policy Initiative, a National Minimum Wage Commissioner, and a member of the Nedlac Community Constituency. Greetings, Mr. President. I want to talk about social security and the idea of a basic income grant, which has been mooted within ANC policy documents, but I fear that it's not getting the urgency and the priority that it requires. We know in South Africa that social security and the understanding of the impact, the potential, has been around since 2002 with the Taylor Report Commission. We know that poverty is dire, but it's killing the economy, as well as being a betrayal of the constitutional liberation rights. Now, we've got 11.9 million people unemployed. To create 11.9 million
decent jobs is not going to happen overnight. So the question is, what happens to people and what happens to the economy in the interim? So I've got 3 points. There might be a few more, but I've been told always to say 3 points.
Always say 3 and to keep it to 3.
I think you might have told me.
Yeah.
I can't hear the last bit. So 3 points is, firstly, I would say that the 350 Rand grant that you've mentioned was a really good pilot for a universal basic income. The empirical evidence that has been collected from that shows, firstly, that the need is incredibly great, but it must be universal. The point is that when people use the grant to make small amounts of income, because of the means test, they lost the grant. So when you use the grant to make money, you get penalized. Instead, if it was universal and SARS was used to claw back from people who don't need it, we don't run that risk of disincentivizing people. It's not the grant that creates dependency, it's the means test and the targeting. I think that's a really critical point, which DSD and other researchers with DSD have shown through. Secondly, that the research done by Social Policy Initiative by Duma Krubule clearly demonstrates both the affordability and the necessity of a 2-stage national stimulus, which would include the first stage would be the rolled out implementation of a universal basic income, according to the 3 poverty lines. But the second 3 years would be an employment stimulus. Many people who advocate for a basic income grant try to do it by stealth. They say it's not going to cost much. It doesn't make it, we can afford it. The point is it is going to cost, but it is affordable. And almost half of it starts paying for itself in years 2 and 3. And it creates a number of jobs and starts stimulating the economy, which is not happening in any other way. So in terms of the broader context, the macroeconomic framework needs to change. We need to target growth and unemployment, not debt and inflation. Currently, our factories have such underutilized capacity that to cite inflation as an obstacle is actually a mischievous excuse to a large extent. And then thirdly, the amount of the grant. The 350 Rand grant is too small. It manages poverty. It doesn't seek to eliminate poverty. And it certainly doesn't create the stimulus that we need to rescue the economy. So that was point 1 step. So why is there no political will to change the reality? We know that the grant was reintroduced after the July 2021 riots. We also know that Minister of Social Development's Green Paper, which was introduced in October 2021 with a National Social Security Fund and Universal Basic Income, was withdrawn 9 days after protest by pension fund managers. So it seems that that pressure is the only way to do short-term policy patching. And I would, in conclusion, say that, like potholes, you can't do social security policy patching in a piecemeal fashion. So even if the Constitution and the morality of ending poverty doesn't compel us to adopt the lifeline of universal basic income, the fact that it is the only hope for a scaled economic recovery should. So we would like to see the ANC grasp as a serious commitment as decent universal basic income and not say that it's subject to the affordability, because the country cannot afford not to have a decent UBI. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Isabel. We're going to allow the President some time to respond, and then I'm going to start with you, Prof, at the back after.
Let me start off with the VC's question about the capacity in the local government space. The VC has written a book about the local government area, and he knows quite a lot and knows the challenges that we have in that space. And many of the things that he says are true. There is essentially a number of problems that we face there. And we have said ourselves, many of the problems that we face in the local government space are political. They are given rise to by our own ANC politics, where there is contestation, where there is factionalism, where there is just not the willingness to do things as well as they should. But that is precisely the problem that we are addressing on an ongoing basis, and it's part of the reform process. And there are going to be stops and starts and reversals in that area. And there's also corruption, quite rampant corruption in that area, which also is given rise to by our procurement system that gives people the opportunities to embark on corrupt activities. We are seeking to close those loopholes on those spaces. Working together, by the way, with the Auditor General, the SIU, and one of the institutions that I want to commend is the capability that the Special Investigating Unit has been able to achieve over the past 4 years. Their progress is phenomenal. They've been able to do much more in this period than they've ever done in the past. And that needs to be recognized. They are able to investigate and identify people who have done wrong things. And so in rebuilding the capacity of government, we're focusing on local government. And you say that maybe separate parts of the party do not work in sync with what we are articulating at national level. We've taken that as our task, and in this post the 55th conference, you will find that, sir, we've got a much more effective Secretary General's office. We've got a much more hands-on National Executive Office that has members who are crisscrossing the length and the breadth of the country, interfacing and interacting with our structures, both at provincial, regional, and branch level. We are spending quite a lot of time interfacing with those where we have problems. And the visits that we are making as the NWC to various parts of our country and provinces is meaningful. Last week, we were in Gauteng, and it was a joy for me to sit in the Johannesburg region and listen to easily almost 400 branch leaders within our region talking about what's happening on the ground, and also talking about some of the challenges that they have with regard to contestation at that level. And I can testify to the fact that much as we've had problems, we are repairing those problems, and we are in the rebuild mode. And I guess because renewal is a process, it will take time, and it is taking time, and in some cases it takes its toll. I mean, in other provinces we are beset with problems that result in killings and all that. And that too is a challenge that we have to face as the ANC and address. But the good thing is that we are addressing that through streamlining our rules, insisting on the adherence to our constitution, to our values. So it is a mammoth task, and the book that you wrote is quite enlightening because it sheds a light on some of the key problems. I found your book to be quite informative and very critical, which we also welcome. So your standing here and saying what you've said is also adding to the work that we have to do. Our job is cut out. You say we sit here and we articulate, and what we say here is not being done at the local level. Quite a bit of it is being done. We've got, with the relaunch of our leagues, with the provinces all having gone to conferences, and with some, regions being contested, but it's not an avalanche of dysfunctionality. It's more and more a process born out of real experience of rebuilding. So please, my dear professor, have confidence. The ANC is in rebuild mode. On the colleague from the School of Government who spoke more about foreign policy, a better Africa and a better world. We are obviously disturbed and really concerned about the a number of coups that have happened within the last 2 years, with one having happened just recently after an election. And obviously the AU is seized with addressing all this. And I wouldn't say the AU is incapable. The AU has come up with a number of policy positions, rules and regulations of what needs to be done and adhered to. And so the AU plays a critical role and has made great advances in the recent past. The issue of coups is part of our policy or thrust to silence the guns. This was envisaged a few years ago. We did think that when we held the summit here in Johannesburg, we would have silenced the guns. That has not happened. So we still have a big job ahead of us to silence those guns and to make sure that those coups do not take place. And we are also having to reflect on what gives rise to these coups, because as you look at a number of countries, there are a number of underlying factors that are driving the incidence of these coups. So that has to be looked at very closely. The issue of democratic elections. Elections are quite messy most of the time. There is no real perfect election, I can tell you that. This is the contestation amongst candidates, amongst parties, and it often results in disputes, in doubts, and certain practices not having been fully adhered to. And it happens all over the world. I mean, even in what one can say is the so-called big democracy, not as big as India, of course, America. I mean, just look at what happened in the last election in America. Those who claim that, they are the best democracy in the world. It also happens to them. So let's not really harshly judge the outcome of elections on our continent. I think the participants or the countries that go through these elections often say they listen very carefully to election observers, and they pick up a lot of lessons and a lot of experience and a lot of recommendations and advice. Similarly, that is what would be happening in the most recent election on our continent, which is Zimbabwe. Professor Phakeng, you are absolutely right. We have a lot of capable people in our country, and sometimes we don't open our eyes fully in the capability of many of our people. And I think you're right in saying maybe they are applauded outside of our country than they are. And that's what also is said in the Bible, that prophets are often recognized outside from their countries rather than in their own countries. But we must admit that many people in our country are capable, are well trained, and they need to be applauded and celebrated. Now, you say that we've only built 2 universities. Yes, in, say, 30 years. We've got 2 universities that are going to be built soon. And I was actually quite impressed to see that there will be a university in Hammanskraal soon, a place that we may never have thought would immediately have a university. And you are right, we need to build more and more universities. Being a 60-something million people country, we need to have more higher ed institutions of learning. But we should also recognize that the achievements that we have wrought in higher education are quite phenomenal. The student body in our country would be about 1.3, 1.4 million today, and 750,000 of those are being fully funded by the government. And Minister of Higher Education was telling me that we now spend 48 billion rand in funding students in higher education. You do not find that in any other country on the continent, only in South Africa. And I think that's something we need to be proud about. And we are building more TVET colleges. The tendency has always been get children to go to university and so on. We are now focusing more on saying let's build more colleges, TVET colleges, so that we can increase the cohort of more well-qualified students. Professor Tidiambe, you spoke about the quality of education. Yes, and all of us will testify to the fact that the quality of our education needs to improve exponentially. And sometimes we are measured on these surveys that we get involved in, like the PILS survey, which found that we come, almost near to the bottom, where our children are said not to be able to read for meaning and understanding. And I read an article written by a professor the other day who said, we judge ourselves too harshly because that survey is actually, there are more sort of economically developed countries who participate in that survey and less countries from the African continent who participate. But that does not mean that we should not improve the quality of our education, which we are working on. And seeing and understanding that the biggest damage that was done by apartheid was in education. Improving education is going to be a generational issue. It is definitely not going to happen overnight, because even those who are teaching in our school system were damaged by apartheid education themselves. And so therefore we are doing remedial work, and we will arrive at a point where we really have great and effective teachers in time. And we already see the signs of it. The 800,000 young people that we brought into schools as assistants are at another level. Their IT proficiency was found by the existing teachers in the various schools, 23,000 schools, as being of a great contribution. So it means that the wheel is turning, and obviously because it is such a damaged wheel, it'll take time to turn, but we should never lose hope. Isabel, you will testify to the fact that we are working together in an integrated way, non-governmental organizations and government, to look at how the basic income grant can be put in place, that we should have comprehensive social security. Yes, we've got almost 12 million people who do not have jobs, and you obviously concede that we will never be able to create jobs for all those people. So therefore there is a need, as it is what inspired us to opt for the 350 grant, because as COVID's impact was proving to be more and more negative, we concluded that we needed to do something for those who are unemployed and who are poor. That's why the 350 grant was then introduced. You are right, it is too small, and what it does, it manages poverty, and we need to have a grant that is going to be able to lift more and more of our people out of poverty. You say that our macroeconomic architecture needs to change. That is a matter that obviously needs to be fully and thoroughly discussed. And you argue that, yes, it is affordable. Government has to deal with so many asks or needs. The other day, I asked the minister to tell me, Minister of Finance, to tell me, how much are we spending on the indigent funding for poor families for electricity and water. And he gave me a number that I never thought we had. I thought we would spend 4 billion. We spend more than that number, which runs into many, many billions, in supporting our people, in alleviating the bad situation that they are living under. So, Isabel, the discussions is ongoing, and even as we move forward to the next budget, it is a matter that we are going to be looking at very closely, and obviously aided and abetted by yourselves in the NGO sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We're going to move to closing. Prof. Lenkabula, where's the prof that I promised? And then one, are these academic, not media questions, academic questions? Okay, we are taking 2 and then we're closing. Yes. Oh, did they take the mic away? Sorry. Okay, there it is. It keeps moving, that one. Could I ask you to come to the middle, please?
This thing is coming off. Okay.
Oh, okay. Is it okay?
Good afternoon, President and colleagues.
Yeah. This is a real roving mic.
No, I can't.
And now she can't be seen.
I can't see her when she's there.
Okay.
Professor.
Good afternoon, President. I'm truly delighted to be given the opportunity. My name is Puleng Lenkabula. I'm from the University of South Africa, your alma mater, President.
Yes.
This is the university that has produced multiple professionals in this country, and it requires a place in the history of the African National Congress as it does of the global arena. I believe at this point, the questions that I want to raise are quite important. I feel our engagements today have focused mostly on the fault lines of what has not been accomplished, to the extent that it has forgotten the emancipatory project that the African National Congress or the country would have been pivotal in projecting and negotiating in a new democracy. And I think when we do that, we hollow out the imperative for historicizing the shifting of the democratic dispensation and the opportunities that would have been gained from that. And this is a deficiency that we Africans often project. We project the ugliness of our history and not necessarily the progressive and enabling. So our young and youth and young adults cannot use ideas, metaphors, systems, and processes that are constructive. Instead, they see Africa's knowledge systems, Africa's institutions, including the ANC, and Africa's ideation not progressive. And I would like to make an appeal that we must go back and look at what is it that we have accomplished for the country, the continent, and the world, and how then do we package it into the future. The second question that I wanted to state, the higher education system only caters for 1.2 million. 33 to 37% of those are at University of South Africa. The challenges of successes of universities, President, are the fact that we are not investing in the digitization systems that enable multiplicities of participation of students in the educational arena. And this is an area that we need to strengthen because it creates a challenge. Mamuketi, Professor Pakeng raised the issue of not optimizing the youthful dividend. I think this is true because We are creating a binary of TVET colleges and university systems instead of looking at an integrated approach. Finally, I feel we're not investing in the innovation cycle of our university system. This country invested in a car, EV car, way before the Asian countries, the European countries would have invested in it. Joule. It only needed 9 billion for commercialization to becoming a global competitive edge for our country. There are multiple examples that we can raise, but I just wanted to use the EV car because now that we're talking about new energy systems, sustainability and whatever, we forget that the Joule car that was developed by the university systems here was just allowed to be showcased in Geneva and elsewhere and not invested into becoming an economically competitive resource from our country into the global arena. We need to do that. Marine sciences, aeronautics, biotechnologies, these are important competitive matters that we need to be protecting because the natural resources of the country, the biotic resources of the country, the planetary resources of the country cannot be optimized for economic benefit if these investments are not made. And I'd like for us to rethink. It is one thing to talk about how many students we support to access higher education, President. It's another for them to ensuring that their talents are optimized for transforming our country. And that's an appeal I'd like to make to you and the ANC. And I'm hoping that those investments will be looked into strongly. We're not going to buy curtains with them, President.
Thank you very much, Prof. David.
What did she say?
We're not going to buy curtains with the money that you give.
Oh, eat you.
My name is David Maimela, and I come from myself. It was not a caucus between me and her, but we just happened to raise our hands at the end. Just want to put that up front. I think there are one or two affirmative or affirmations that I want to make for the government of the day and the ANC in particular. I think the first one that we have to agree on, emphatically, is the fact that since 1994, South Africa is indeed a better place than it was before 1994. I think we need to say that.
I did say that.
I'm saying that us from the audience as well.
Indeed.
Then the second affirmation that I think we need to make is that, in my view, I think millions of Africans and black Africans see the ANC as the only thing that they truly own. And I think this is very important from a historical and an identity point of view. So I think that type of understanding requires that the ANC probably looks at what I refer to as the basics. The basics for me would be for the ANC to consider, to ask itself the question, from the beginning when the political movement started, it sought to resolve what was then called the South African problem.
David, is this a lecture?
No, it's not. I'm going to be brief, actually. It was formed to resolve the South African problem. And Africans had to unite and form a movement in order for it to deal with the South African problem. And vice versa, the fact that the ANC was formed to deal with it. Today, I don't seem to hear President, because the entire session was too practical for my liking. I don't seem to hear us asking the basic and fundamental question. 30 years on, what is the basic South African problem? And how can we resolve it? Because I think this is what should define the philosophy, the ideology, the strategy, the policy, and the actions of the African National Congress. So I'm saying that this is a homework, I think, for all of us. Quickly coming to the practical side of things, I think it was Professor Mkandawire, the late, who said that the state in Africa, because of the legacy of colonialism, is always constrained and limited to deal with the provision, the management and the provision of basic services, and does not deal with the fundamental question on how to deal with the transformation of the economy. Because if you deal with the transformation of the economy, you are going to unleash the catalytic forces that will actually deal with the social and the basic problems. That's what many people actually want. Whether you look at Europe or America, basically that's or whether you look at Asia, that becomes that. So for me, if you were to prioritize, Mr. President, it's the economy, it's infrastructure, education, and health. Thank you, but you must define what the South African problem is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bringing us back to the big ideas. It's important. Last comment, and then we're closing.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Mr. President and colleagues. My name is Professor Sylvester Mpandeli. I work at Water Research Commission. 3 suggestions. One, you spoke about those 7 pillars of ANC manifestos. Is those 7 pillars are not talking to each other, we'll continue having problems because we'll be taking a linear approach. We need to harmonize them, create trade-offs and so on. That's my first comment. Second comment or suggestion, Mr. President, you spoke about the government feeding scheme. And I can bet we've got various knowledge generations in this country like Water Research Commission, ARC and so on. If you can encourage government departments, especially departments of basic education, to adopt this principle to say, one school, one garden. One school, one garden. Which means that that principle is going to complement the government feeding scheme. This is very, very important in order not to constrain the fiscal system. And this is something that is being done in Europe, South America, and so on. My last comment is linked to the first comment with regards to various multi-stresses that we are facing, including climate change, population growth, and so on. We need to drive our activities in an integrated or in an exhaust way. For example, agriculture, energy, biodiversity, all these sectors need to talk to one another. And we have got technologies that can address socio-economic challenges that we are facing in the country, including technologies that have been developed within the water and agriculture sectors. Those are my 3 suggestions or comments, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Always good to end on a scientific note, ending with the scientist. Mr. President, your responses.